I want to tell you the story of this legendary car, the Ferrari 312T. This is the car that put Ferrari back on top, the car that brought Niki Lauda his first Formula 1 World Championship. It's also the car you see in the Rush movie. But why is it special? Why does it have this place in history? Well, for that, we must rewind back to 1970. You see, for much of the early 1970s, Scuderia Ferrari was struggling in F1. The Brits ruled Formula 1, British drivers, British teams, or both. Like Graham Hill with Lotus, Jackie Stewart with Matra, Jackie Stewart again with Tyrrell, Jochen Rindt and Emerson Fittipaldi with Lotus again. You see what's missing? No Italians, no Ferrari. In fact, the last Ferrari championship was in 1964 for the late John Surtees. It had been 10 whole years since Ferrari won a championship. And that brings us now to the 1974 season. Ferrari have a decent enough car. They've finally beaten the damn Brits, Lotus, Tyrrell, Brabham, Hesketh. So is it finally time? Are Ferrari finally world champions again? Nope, not quite. P2 in the Constructors' Championship for 1974. What? Behind who? Don't tell me it's another British team. I mean, who else is even there? McLaren and Emerson Fittipaldi, 1974 world champions. And that was the last straw for Il Grande Vecchio, the great old man, Enzo Ferrari. Changes needed to be made. Radical changes. You see, here's the thing about the car that Ferrari raced in 1974, the SF312B3. It began life in 1970, and when it debuted, it wasn't a bad car. But by 1974, it was a bit, it was bad. So, how does that happen? Now, like most Ferrari cars in that day, the 1970 Ferrari was designed by veteran engineer Mauro Forghieri. Under his leadership, it was developed through 71 and 72, but by 1973, Fiat's Ferrari executives had banished Mauro Forghieri to the shadow realm. He was transferred to an experimental project, and under the new boss, Sandro Colombo, the 312B3 took a different direction and it got worse and worse and worse. Which brings our story back to the 1974 season, racing a car that had gotten progressively worse under new leadership. So close, yet so far, beaten by the damn Brits, again. And the old boss, he wanted changes at Ferrari. Now you see, at the time, Enzo had an assistant, this clever young lawyer named Luca di Montezemolo. So he named him Scuderia Ferrari team manager. And the first thing Montezemolo did as team manager was to bring back the OG, Mauro Forghieri. Enzo said, radical changes, right? We're gonna be radical.
भाई ने बोला करने का तो करने का.
So now this car we've used from 1970 to 74, let's take a closer look at it. In 1970, it looked like this. By 1972, it looked like this. In 1973, Forghieri was actually inspired by the front of the Tyrrell car of that time, so he made this. The Italian media, of course, had their fun with it. They called it Forghieri's Spazzaneve, the snowplow car. But of course, by the time the snowplow car actually got anywhere, Forghieri had already been banished and the car development had gone downhill. But now, he was back in charge of tech at Scuderia Ferrari. He had all these ideas left over and Montezemolo let him loose. Remember? Enzo wanted radical changes. So the chassis, the bodywork, engine, gearbox, everything fully redesigned. You see, the big problem with this existing car, by the end of 1973, it had become notoriously bad with its handling. The suspension was just all over the place. It had gotten so bad that, actually, here's a story that tells you how bad. You probably know it if you've seen the Rush movie, but I'll tell you. The end of 1973, Ferrari signed Niki Lauda. They arranged a test session at Ferrari's private track Fiorano for Niki to drive the Ferrari for the first time. The old man, Il Commendatore Enzo Ferrari, is there. His son, Piero Ferrari, is there as well as a bit of a translator because Niki couldn't speak Italian and Enzo, of course, only spoke Italian. Anyway, Niki drives a few laps, comes back in, and Piero asks him, "So, do you love it or what? Finally driving a Ferrari? Dream come true, huh?" Niki Lauda replies,
"It's terrible. Drives like a pig."
Oh, you can't say that.
Why not?
It's a Ferrari.
It's a shitbox. It understeers like crazy and the weight distribution is a disaster. It's amazing. All these facilities and you make a piece of crap like this.
But now they've got to go back to Enzo Ferrari and tell him what's going on, right? Piero tries to sugarcoat it and he tells his dad, well, Niki says the car is okay, it's not that great. Even just for that, Enzo Ferrari is angry. He looks at Niki Lauda like, what did you say? The Ferrari is not great? Niki Lauda corrects Enzo Ferrari. He says, not great. No, I said it's shit actually. Everyone around stands shocked, stunned, just waiting for Enzo Ferrari to blow up. 30 seconds, the old man is absolutely silent. He doesn't say a word. The longest 30 seconds of Niki Lauda's life, as he admitted himself. Finally, Enzo Ferrari breaks silence. Surprisingly, he doesn't yell at all. He asks Niki in a very annoyed tone, okay, what is shit? The suspension, sir, it's a disaster. Enzo Ferrari nods. He calls over his engineers and mechanics and tells Niki, if they can fix it like you want it, how much faster can you go? Niki Lauda says, I don't know, maybe 3/10, maybe half a second. Enzo says, okay, they'll fix it exactly like you want it, but if you don't go half a second faster,
Screw you! You're fired!
The Ferrari engineers and mechanics make that suspension adjustment in a week, and Niki Lauda goes 8/10 faster. Although the continuous car complaints would remain throughout 1974 and Niki would only finish P4 that season thanks to 5 continuous retirements to end the season, that incident really solidified Niki Lauda's relationship with Ferrari. And equally as important, it solidified Enzo Ferrari's respect for his new driver, Niki Lauda. Anyway, back to the main story. It's 1974. We're working on the radical redesign for the 1975 car. Forgari has come back in and he's gotten right into it. The annoying understeer on the old car that Niki Lauda always complained about, gone, fixed. Interestingly, it was clear that Forgari had been studying the rivals during his time off. It looked like he had been seeking inspiration from Derek Gardner's design of the Tyrrell and Robin Hurd's March cars. The existing 1974 Ferrari was understeery and it just felt lazy. And for it to be more agile and responsive, the design had to be compact. The packaging of the design components had to fit in tighter. The old monocoque design was just aluminium, so it was replaced by a steel tube chassis frame with aluminium shear panels. The packaging of the side pods on the new design was beautiful. All sorts of engine components, cooling systems, and the mandatory side impact structures neatly hidden away in the side pods. Matter of fact, it even curved up elegantly to direct airflow over the big Goodyear tires. And most notably, Forgari had a stroke of genius with the new gearbox. He changed the orientation of the gearbox. He mounted the gearbox transversely on the new car. This meant it could now be mounted ahead of the rear axle, which meant way better weight distribution and a lower polar moment of inertia. That was huge, and with that, the 1975 Ferrari Formula 1 car was ready. They called it the 312T. 312 because it was a 3-liter 12-cylinder engine, and T for the transverse gearbox. And thus, the 1975 Ferrari 312T was born. And actually, when Mauro Forgari showed it off to Enzo Ferrari for the first time, the first thing the old man said was, "Mamma mia, how ugly. Let's just hope it's fast." The car was better, the car was ready, but it seemed like Ferrari weren't. Because for the first 2 races of the 1975 season, they still used the old car and they kept the 312T under wraps. Argentina and Brazil, the first 2 races with the old car, Niki Lauda P6 and P5, Clay Regazzoni P4 in both races. Meanwhile, they'd been comparing the performance of the new car versus the old car at their private test track and getting ready for the new car's debut. And for the 3rd race of the 1975 season in South Africa, they thought, okay, we're ready for the new car. But when they raced the new car, when they debuted it in South Africa, the results weren't magically great like they expected. Niki Lauda P5 again, and owing to a disaster with car setup, Clay Regazzoni P16. Okay, the next race in Spain, was it great? Nope, a double DNF. But to be fair, you couldn't really read into that. It was a physical collision accident that caused the double DNF in Spain, nothing to do with car performance. They were damn sure the car performance was there. They just had to start putting clean race weekends together and the results would come. And unlike right now in 2022, what followed in 1975 was magical. Niki Lauda came to the next race in Monaco and won. The next race after that, the Belgian Grand Prix at Zolder, he won again. And the next race after that, the Swedish Grand Prix at Anderstorp, can he make it a hat-trick? You bet he can. The Ferrari 312 team, my god, it was roaring. Niki Lauda was demolishing the competition in the new car. What followed after the 3 wins were podiums at Zandvoort, the Nürburgring and Monza, and he finished the season off in style with a win at the US Grand Prix at Watkins Glen. The Ferrari 312T with Niki Lauda at the wheel had restored Scuderia Ferrari to the top.
Und? Soll ich jetzt aus wie ein Rennfahrer?
The era of British Formula 1 domination was over. I say the era was over because although James Hunt in the McLaren won the Drivers' Championship the next year in 1976, it was still back-to-back constructors' titles for Ferrari. The 312T was developed, it was revised, and it continued to dominate. Niki Lauda and Ferrari came back in 1977, world champions again. Although Mario Andretti and Lotus beat them pretty convincingly in 78, Ferrari won their 4th title in 5 years in 1979. This time with Jody Scheckter as Drivers' World Champion, Niki Lauda having moved on to the Brabham team. The first half of the 70s was Britain. The second half of the 70s was undoubtedly Italy. It was Scuderia Ferrari, thanks to the 312T. However, it wasn't meant to be a fairy tale ending for the 312T series of cars. The greater aerodynamic needs that came to the sport at the turn of the 1980s, Ferrari just could not adapt their development to it. And frankly, it became embarrassing. Against the aero needs of 1980, the 312T5 version Ferrari was nowhere, and I mean nowhere. For the first time in 7 years, Ferrari failed to win even a single race in the 1980 season. And they finished 10th out of 11 teams in the Constructors' Championship. Second worst team in 1980, having won the title in 1979. When was the last time you saw that happen? How very Ferrari, you might say, huh? Jody Scheckter, the man who won the title with Ferrari the previous year, it got so bad for him that he had only 1 points finish that entire season and had a bunch of retirements. And the car just got so slow over the course of the season that Scheckter was too slow to even qualify for the Canada race. And at the end of the 1980 season, he retired from Formula 1 itself. All things considered though, the 312T, it was a special car. 27 race wins, 3 Drivers' Championships and 4 Constructors' Championships. In an era where the British outclassed them for 10 years, this was the car with which they stood up and said, nah, we're Scuderia Ferrari. Also, you know how at the start of the 1975 season, when Forghieri showed the car off to Enzo Ferrari, and the old man had said, Mamma mia, it's ugly. Forghieri recalled that at the end of the 1975 season, after they'd won the championship, the old man came back to him and said, you know Mauro, now that I'm getting used to it, I'm starting to find it pretty. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the story of the Ferrari 312T. Thank you so much for watching. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'm at bhat.tech on Instagram if you want to check that out. And I'll see you on the next one. Jan Barpe.